Warner Brothers and DC's Blue Beetle has been pronounced dead at the box office, and it's going to be another big loss for Warner Brothers, somewhere to the tune of $100 million or more. Here we go. Renegade Online. Well, folks, welcome back. Another great day here at Valiant Renegade. It's good to see everybody out there once again. And if you are like one of the many folks watching this video, not yet subscribed to this channel, please take a moment and turn that little red subscribe button to gray. Hit that like button, hit that notification bell, share this sucker out on the social medias, and of course, please do leave a comment before you head out the door today. The launch of the Blue Beetle from DC Studios and Warner Brothers has been an unmitigated disaster. Even guys like Scotty Mendelson, formerly of Forbes magazine, who covered the Hollywood beat there, with comments like this: the mere $25 million launch, that's the domestic numbers, pitiful numbers for Blue Beetle, highlights something that Scotty Mendelson and others have said for years, which is that it was downright cruel for DC and Marvel to mostly wait to diversify their lineup until just before superhero films stopped being automatic event movies. Now, the question I have for Scotty is, how in the heck did anybody know when these things were suddenly going to stop being event films? Probably the writers and studios should have had some early indication based on the quality of scripts they've been getting back since movies like Endgame came out in 2019, things like the Chris Nolan Batman films. Everything, especially from DC, since that Chris Nolan era in particular, has been largely crap. Now, sure, there were a few exceptions out there that did very well at the box office, things like the first Wonder Woman film that did over $800 million globally and was very well loved by many fans, even if they had some complaints about the poor quality CGI and post-production. Aquaman, of course, broke the $1 billion mark, but that had a lot of draw from the female side of things, thanks to Jason Momoa. But the big-ticket items from DC, things like Batman vs. Superman and the Justice League, just did not perform up to par, especially when you consider the enormous budgets that those films commanded to complete production. But even more modestly budgeted movies, recent entries like Shazam, Fury of the Gods, just didn't do well enough in theaters to really turn a profit, but along came Blue Beetle and just really set the record. The kind that you don't want to set. $25 million opening weekend for this picture domestically. I'm sorry, $25,030,225 opening weekend for this film that came in with about a $120 million reported budget. Of course, that's before Warner Brothers would have spent a penny on marketing. And I suspect if Warner Brothers had the same kind of indication that, say, Disney did recently with what they thought Indiana Jones was going to do, they may have pulled back on that marketing budget before going full bore with it in the weeks leading up to this movie's release. But back to this point that Scott Mendelson tried to make here was that they wanted to diversify their lineup, but they waited until superhero films stopped being automatic event movies. I'm going to go ahead and make an assumption that what Scotty is talking about is not diversifying the lineup so much as the diversity and inclusion aspect, with this, of course, being a Latino superhero. The problem, of course, with Scotty's assertion is in looking at the international box office right there. You see, this is the kind of film that if it was going to be a big hit internationally, obviously there are certain countries that a studio like Warner Brothers, when this movie was greenlit years ago, would have been targeting for sure to get big international boosts. Things like Mexico, Central America, and South American countries. As you can see here, they really didn't ring the bell. From Nancy Tartaglione at Deadline Magazine, starting with the new studio entry this weekend, Warner Brothers DC's Blue Beetle scurried to an $18 million opening in 63 markets. Ouch! Breaking it down, the international performance for DC Warner Brothers Blue Beetle, Mexico was the top play at $2.7 million. That's not much of a launch even for Mexico. Brazil grossed $2.1 million at the open. number 1 on par with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and 42% over the Suicide Squad. But let's take a look at the recent entries: Blue Beetle, Black Adam, and Shazam: Fury of the Gods. Now, the production budget for Blue Beetle, again, came in on the lowest end of these most recent 3, and that's good news. The problem is, even if they still had a modest, say, $75 to $80 million marketing budget, even if they scaled it back to just 50% at, say, $60 million, which would be a pretty light budget for a film of this scale, you're still talking about a film that needs easily between $350 and $400 million at the retail box office level just to break even. And if you look over to the far right with Shazam: Fury of the Gods, the total worldwide box office for that film, $132 million. That movie easily lost about $100 million for Warner Brothers, and quite honestly, Blue Beetle is looking to do about the same, if not potentially even more. The real question is, how far does this movie leg out from here? We've had a couple of small surprises this summer with things like Elemental, but I don't see a lot of the same kind of energy for this film, at least not with a broad enough audience. I would have expected to see a larger international pitch in the opening weekend, but it just didn't arrive. Markets like Mexico and Brazil, those are 2 of the biggest international markets for any domestic release here that comes out of Hollywood, but they just did not really hit that well for this movie. I think Blue Beetle is going to struggle to get to $100 million. It may close out with somewhere around 120 to 125, I think, if it's very lucky, because it looks like it's going to follow a similar trajectory to what we saw with Shazam. Now, one of the things this film does have going for it that could potentially be of benefit is that there's not a whole lot of other competition that's due out in theaters in the next several weeks. It could be one of those things of, well, there's really not that much else to see. Most people by now have seen Barbie enough. Most people have seen Oppenheimer enough. Sure, those movies are going to continue to play out, but it may give Blue Beetle a little bit of extra room to where it could work its way up to that $125 million mark. Otherwise, if the response to this film and the interest of this film does not pick up substantially with good word of mouth after this opening weekend, this movie might not even get to $100 million in worldwide gross. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe. Share this sucker out on the social medias. And until next time, take care.